Hi and welcome. I'm Steve Martirano, and this is the Behavioral Corner. You're invited to hang with us as we discuss the ways we live today, the choices we make, the things we do, and how they affect our health and well-being. So you're on the corner, the Behavioral Corner. Please hang around a while. Hello, everybody. Hi, and welcome to the Behavioral Corner. My name is Steve Martirano. You know what I do. I hang here on the corner in good weather and bad, and that'll become significant in a moment. What we do in the Behavioral Corner is we talk about everything. This is a podcast about everything because everything affects our behavioral health. We are underwritten by our great partners, Retreat Behavioral Health, about which more you'll hear later. Well, you know what? I'm really happy, sort of, to introduce today's topic because we have literally pulled it from the headlines. This is a very significant story that you're going to be reading more and more about. Very recently, a day or two ago, the New York Times, among others, had stories concerning climate change and the impact on our mental health. Just a word or two about the Times piece, the unseen toll of a warming world. That paragraph says, experts and psychologists are racing to understand the torments of a volatile, unpredictable planet and how it shapes our minds and mental healths. In February, just a month ago, a major new study highlighted the mental health effects of climate change for the first time, saying that anxiety and stress from a changing climate were likely to increase in coming years. Well, we think that's probably true. And so we thought we'd go find somebody who knows much more about it than I. We're pleased to have Professor Debbie Sturm with us. Professor Sturm is in the Department of Graduate Psychology at James Madison University in the Commonwealth of Virginia. She is a licensed clinician, therapist in Virginia, and she is associated with a group called Climate Psychology Alliance of North America. Professor, thanks for joining us on the Behavioral Corner.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
I think we should begin right away with this brand new study. But before you get to the study, why is this study brand new? How long has this problem of anxiety associated with climate been apparent to you and your colleagues?
Well, I think there's two questions there that are of value. First of all, why is this study brand new? I think because of the nuance of the particular study. But the fact is that we've been talking about the sort of the psychological toll of climate change for as long as we've been talking about climate change. And I think like over time, the names, the terms, the better understanding has evolved. But I think early on, people were talking about the stressors. At that time, probably 25, 30 years ago, we had people talking about the scientists and the distress that they were experiencing as they were envisioning what was to come. And then, back in the 90s, social workers, psychologists, our field started to get a feel for the distress that would accompany the changes were they to happen. And I think at that time, many people were hoping that this is not the trajectory we were taking. But the conversation about the distress that would accompany climate change has been in place. We're just getting it much more clearly defined, much more better researched, and have a greater clinical awareness of how this presents.
Yeah. Let's put a fine point on this so people can understand. This is an interesting dynamic. It's certainly no news that the weather has affected our behavior and feelings forever. Sunny days, you feel great. Gloomy days, maybe you don't feel so well. None of that would ever have been considered a disorder or even problematic. Your moods change because of weather. What's changing here, and is this syndrome, whatever we're going to call it, climate anxiety, a disorder?
I think that's really interesting. I'm not sure that we're going to see it as a diagnostic disorder in the DSM anytime soon. And also one of the elements of climate anxiety is that it really is sort of a logical and rational response to facing the terror that's projected with climate change. So it is something that's like, this makes absolute sense to feel intense angst and concern when you're faced with the details and the facts.
Right. Why go see a clinician with what looks like it might be a mood disorder, when the logical reaction is, you're right. Well, you're supposed to be anxious about this. And it's depressing. It is depressing. Let's pause for a minute and explain the DSM-5 for people who don't know. What is it, and how does a particular behavior, wind up in the manual as an actual disorder?
That's a very good question. And I'm not tremendously involved in that, except for to say that these tend to have years and years and years of empirical data behind them. And there's panels of people who are involved in creating the updates to the DSM. That's sort of where I feel a little, not skepticism, but like, I'm not sure that this is going to end up in the DSM, or if it does, it could become like a subcategory of anxiety disorders. But again, it's hard to attach disorder to the climate anxiety. It's certainly distressing, but is it disordered? It's hard to say, because it does make so much sense.
Well, it's not an unimportant distinction whether it winds up in the DSM or not. There are issues of insurance and who will pay for all this stuff and all of that. And also, I think it sharpens people's attention. Well, wait a minute. The way I'm feeling, while it might be justified under the circumstances, is negatively impacting my life. I think that's what we're talking about, right? Agreed.
And I think there's an important sort of justice issue in there too when you bring up mental health concerns that are part of the DSM tend to then also be supported by our systems of care. And so people who are experiencing intense climate anxiety but don't have the support of insurance companies on their side might not get the treatment that they need because they can't afford it or access it because it's not validated by a code. And so I think there are definitely some social justice implications to the presence of it within the DSM. But is it heading that way? It's hard to tell, but it is an access question for sure.
I wouldn't expect either of us to have a guess about how it's going to work out, but it occurs to me, and I wonder how you feel, that two things might result if it were to wind up in the DSM. One is that, as we said, the healthcare system would be there in cases where people needed it to treat this. And secondly, if the climate is so bad that the medical establishment says it's resulting in mood behavior that's destructive to people, maybe it'll be another big piece of evidence that this is a serious issue. Do you think, you think that might be an important benefit to actually identifying it as a disorder?
Yeah, I think that's one of many pathways. Certainly it increases sort of the credibility, the validation of all of the things that we've been talking about for a while. I think there's other pathways as well. And I think it's going to become really important that people can hear and understand the intensity of the mental health toll, on par with some of the other experiences that we're going to have. So it's definitely a pathway. And I'm hoping that we can do a lot of other good work too, to just really bring credibility to this aspect.
Would you tell us what exactly the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America is and what you do?
Yeah, absolutely. We're a community of mental health professionals who our mission is to educate other therapists to help people become climate aware in their clinical practice and their research and their teaching and their training of clinicians, and to really spread the word about the impact on mental health that climate change is having in our communities and in our therapy rooms.
You came to my attention through a directory that the Alliance has set up, because when I first read about climate anxiety being potentially treatable, I had all the questions and I thought, well, how to find some clinician, some therapist who's treating people. And they were surprised to find several in my neighborhood, as a matter of fact.
Oh, good.
I'm in Philadelphia. So you came to my attention there. So have you ever treated anyone who came to you because of climate anxiety?
Yeah, I actually have. And at the time, it was more of sort of a secondary thing that they came for. So I haven't had anybody I had not had anybody until fairly recently when I became a member of the directory contact me specifically for that. But I've worked with a lot of particularly college age students who are wrestling with that just as a natural part of examining their world and looking at their future. So I've worked with a lot of college students who have had climate anxiety as part of their presenting issues.
It's fascinating because, listen, the stigma attached to mental health is the mental health problems is, well documented. And one of the more tragic aspects of that is that people, when it comes to mood disorders, are inclined to say, man up, suck it up. Are you kidding? And dismiss it as a real problem. So tell me, when a young person's case comes to see you, and what are they presenting? What are some of the characteristics of climate anxiety?
Yeah. Well, in the case of the people that I've worked with, and again, I've worked a lot with college students, is they're encountering things within their classrooms, and they're hearing about things, and they're doing the hard work to really understand issues, but then they're projecting it onto their own future, and they're realizing, like, it's my future that's compromised. It's my future where people have not sort of followed through on what they needed to in order to make sure I had choices and options going ahead. And the responsibility is going to fall on my shoulders to do something about it. And so one of the big things out of the Hickman study that came out this fall was a realization that children and youth are experiencing climate anxiety in a really different way than adults are, and that their sort of brand or the nuance to their climate anxiety has a betrayal component to it, where there were systems and people that have come for decades before them who didn't do what they needed to do to ensure their safe future. And so whether I'm working with students one-on-one in a counseling session, or whether I'm working with them in a classroom doing sort of a guest speaker thing about climate anxiety, that theme is really prevalent.
It's a crushing irony to think that young people are consciously or unconsciously processing this as a betrayal by their adults. Because I know growing up when my children were very young, you couldn't go to a grammar school or a middle school where there wasn't some presentation by the kids of how much they love trees, or how important clean water is. And then to go 20 years in the future and have the same another set of young people go, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's not true. What's the fear from a clinical standpoint that this is, we may be raising a generation of young people who are nihilists, who figure what's the sense of doing anything?
Well, right now, 40% of the youth who were surveyed in the Hickman study thought that humanity was doomed.
40%?
Yes. So that's a pretty substantial number. And yet I also think it hasn't tipped the scale yet into the majority think humanity is doomed. I do think that it's a message to all of us who are in the older generations to realize the sense of betrayal that they're feeling and make sure that we're doing what we can to demonstrate that we're in, like that we are invested, we're in, we want to be part of the solution. We have their backs, but also we're taking the front steps as well. Because I think one of the things that college students are talking about it quite a bit is, and now this is on our shoulders. And, we can often, I've been astonishingly impressed with the youth advocates in the climate movement. They just will blow your mind. They're so incredible. And we can't let that be like a reassurance to us. We can't say like, wow, these youth are so impressive, they'll fix it, because that's part of the betrayal. Like we can't let their strength let ourselves off the hook. And so I think part of this betrayal is whenever you're working with that as a variable, older generations, parents, educators, community leaders have to equally step up and say, you're right. The ball was dropped in a number of ways and we're back. And you don't have to take the lead. We'll be right there with you.
Yeah, for as long as we're able, as long as we're able. That's a great picture of what the situation is. In one sense, not every generation, but many generations have their cross to bear.
Yes.
I'm sure that the greatest generation that we all know, when they were born in the 20s, the first quarter of the 20th century, when they were born, for the most part, they never asked to have to deal with a crushing worldwide economic collapse and then a rise of fascism and a world war. They didn't ask for that, but they rose to the occasion.
Yeah.
I take it that you are similarly hopeful that we have a bunch of young people that understand that they got to do it too.
Yes. Yeah, I think so too. And as I'm definitely in sort of the both and category of, I have tremendous faith in them. I mean, I'm in awe constantly of their capacity. And I think it's important that in other generations that we look and say, like, our job isn't finished just because they have the capacity to pick it up and do amazing things.
We're not handing it off, right?
We're not like, hey, it's all yours. Like, no, we're saying, like, okay, you're right. The ball was dropped. People didn't look or take things seriously soon enough. And so let's do this together until you've gotten to the point where, like, we're not here anymore. So
our guest is Professor Debbie Sturm. She's from James Madison University. She has, as you can see, a very big interest in mental health and the effect climate change is having on that. With regard to young people, does the denial by a lot of very important people of climate change as a reality must contribute mightily to the anxiety young people feel? We just had former President Trump the other day saying it's a hoax, and he's not alone in believing it's a hoax. How do you counsel young people when they run into that?
I always think about sort of the stages of change in therapy. If people haven't sort of entered into the stages of change at all, I don't want to say I dismiss them because that's too strong, but I really am interested in the people who are in sort of like a pre-contemplation, like, I'm thinking about this, I'm curious, I'm open, I haven't shut the door on this as an issue. And so when I'm working with youth, when I'm talking to students at JMU, that's where I am. It's like, who are the people that have the door cracked? Who are the people that are at least willing to entertain this idea? Because the people who have slammed the door and say, this is a hoax, this isn't true, they aren't our team. They aren't the people who are going to help make the changes. When they're ready to sort of crack the door and be open, like, those are the people who give me hope. Even if they're not completely on board, not prepared to do something, or have their own defense mechanisms, they're still kind of there and reachable and could be part of the solution. But people who have closed the door and are in straight up climate denial.
The choice is stark. You can be part of the solution, or you can be part of the problem. Yeah. Well, you have to decide what group you belong to, and then get into it.
Well, yeah, and where you want to put your energy to, because I have definitely quite a few colleagues who will sort of say the opposite, like, they're willing to engage with kind of anybody at any time because they don't see anyone beyond hope. And I agree, like, nobody's beyond hope. But my choice of energy is to sort of be in the sort of the arena with the people who are at least willing to have a conversation. And I think, for a lot of youth, for a lot of our students, for a lot of young people like my nieces, it's like, okay, who are the people around you who are open, even if it's a little bit? Because there are people who are very closed. There are people who are deniers. There are people who are like complete counter to the solutions that we need. And where do you want your energy to go?
What do you tell as a clinician now? Let's get back. Let's put your clinician's hat back on. When people come in to see you with, pardon me, your garden variety anxiety, mood disorders, you, I'm sure you take them through steps where, this mood disorder is causing you to behave this way. Mm-hmm. Perhaps you should try changing some of these things. Mm-hmm. In order to alleviate some of the anxiety. You mentioned stages of change.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, stages of change is, there's several models of stages of change, but it basically says like, if you almost think about like getting on a Ferris wheel, like unless you're in line at the Ferris wheel, like change isn't in your arena. If you're still like kind of way over there going, I see that there's a Ferris wheel over there, but I'm a roller coaster kind of girl. Bye. Like, so the stages of change is saying, I'm at least in line thinking that I could get on this Ferris wheel. And, the stages of change accounts for that entire process of imagining a little bit of it as being something either interesting, doable, or possible. It also accounts for the space where you sort of slide back. And again, you'll see stages of change a lot in the addiction literature, mm-hmm. So it accounts for relapse as part of recovery. So stages of change will say like, I'm in line on the Ferris wheel. I'm willing to get on the Ferris wheel. I'm sort of taking the ride, but there could be a point where I'm like, this was a terrible idea. I need to get off of here. And or it's terrifying, or I don't want any part of it. So keeping the stages of change in mind is all about, where are you in this process? Where are you in examining your issue? Where are you in willing to kind of pull the pieces apart, take a good look, take the ride? How can you sort of show compassion and understanding for yourself when you do step off, slide back, get afraid, regroup? So that's how I look at that.
Among the groups that are anxious, mm-hmm. and troubled, what's the breakdown? Men to women?
Oh, that's a good question. I actually haven't seen that. I've seen more sort of generationally. But, in therapy, we know that for the most part, like women tend to come to therapy more frequently than men. And so it also seems like in our therapy rooms, we're going to have more women talking about mm-hmm. these mm-hmm. issues than we are men. So I would say like most of us clinicians are encountering more women than men.
What advice, have you ever had the opportunity to give a parent advice when a young child comes in and says, Mom, Dad, is there going to be a world of these? They see fires, they see, earthquakes. Mm-hmm. Have you had the occasion to counsel anybody about how to talk to your children about something like that?
I have. I actually recently had a mom of an 8-year-old contact me about doing therapy with her child. And she asked specifically, what are some things that I can do on my end that help my daughter? I don't want to tell her like it's not to worry, because she actually has something to worry about. And I talked to her a lot about sort of age appropriate, honest, true conversations. It goes back to that betrayal word again. Like if our younger generations are feeling a sense of betrayal or powerlessness or helplessness, the most significant thing we can do is offer them honesty, transparency, openness, and also keeping it at an age appropriate level. And so would I pull out some of these documentaries and share them with my 8-year-old? Maybe not, because sometimes I'm not sure I'm ready to watch all of them. But, asking your child, like, what are you learning in school? What are the things that are coming up for you? What are you afraid of? Let's talk about those things. Let's look some things up together. Like, to be really honest with your children, I think is critical.
Yeah. Is it helpful as a parent to keep in mind and convey to the child that as bad as this may be, one of you or your friends or your group may figure it out?
Yeah.
You may be the one that figures it out.
Yes.
It's important to tell them that, right?
I think it's amazing, honestly. I think that, my personal opinion, I'll sort of hold that. One of my favorite terms that I've encountered in all of this work is radical hope. And one of the aspects of it that sticks for me is the fact that we've solved great problems, but we've always had the period of time where we thought we couldn't, or we didn't know if it was possible, or we had no idea who or how or when. But we've solved great problems. And so for me, radical hope is looking squarely and seriously and importantly at the intensity of the problem. Don't look away, like really look at it, but also remember we have done things and there are people doing amazing things. We can't get into a denial of this in pursuit of that. Like we can't, get sort of like cherry picking like all the good stuff so that we feel better about the bad stuff. But it is a matter of like holding both.
One of the things that actually depresses me now that I've got a psychologist in front of me, I'll tell you, is, I can handle most of everything else about climate change. I think I know how serious it is. But when I hear people who I assume know what they're talking about say, aren't many, but some of them, that it's already too late.
Yeah.
That's a crushing blow. Mm-hmm. Should scientists be saying things like that?
So should they? I think it's a both and. There are definitely scientists who have vantage points where they feel like it's too late. And I honor that. I truly do. I also think that there's a sort of psychological aspect to the experience that scientists have had for years, long before we've been having the conversation about the psychological effect of it. And so their vantage point is very different. And that I find that incredibly depressing too, because I worry about how that shuts down hope and ingenuity and creativity in people who might be on the fence.
Right. And it fosters the what's the point attitude. Point, yeah. What's the point of the whole thing? I think that's the most critical thing we can take away from our conversation, you and I, is that the problem is huge, getting worse. But there's no ignoring it. Mm-hmm. And again, I'm back to this other thing. I'm with you on this one. We don't know what 8, 10, 15, 20-year-old out there isn't sitting on a revolutionary idea, or can mobilize a force that can change things. We just don't know.
I don't know.
Jesse Jackson used to be famous for saying, "Keep hope alive." Mm-hmm. And I guess that's where we are with this. Professor Debbie Sturm. So I guess this is an interesting position you are in. You counsel people on this issue from a mental health perspective. It is not officially a mental health disorder, and I guess you're in a strange spot where you counsel it as though it is, and hope that it doesn't ever become that.
I think that's fair. Yeah.
Right? So that we can marshal all those forces that we're going to need. Yeah. Are there groups? I'm sure there are loads of groups on campus, support groups and action groups.
Well, no? I'll tell you, I don't. Then incorporate the mental health component or the physical component, I think is still a gap to be bridged. And I think we're all having conversations with students about the mental health implications for themselves and for the future, but are we sort of bringing the two together? And I think that's one of the areas where sort of the psychology aspect of climate change is really advocating to be at the table on all the conversations. It's not separate, like we're not compartmentalized people, and none of us are. And we're noticing that among our scientists and researchers who have been doing this for a long time, advocates who have been doing this for a long time, they're experiencing heavy psychological impacts of their work. And the sooner we can all come together and realize like there's an intense mental health component to this that impacts everybody. And so, yeah.
Well, on that note, with regard to people who are having mental health issues, however they manifest themselves, and want to talk to a clinician near them, is that what the Climate Psychology Alliance is all about? People can refer to them, and they'll tell you where to talk to somebody?
Yeah, absolutely. We have a directory. You can search the directory for climate aware therapists in your state. Right now, across the country, there's no ability for therapists of any kind to work across state lines. So you would definitely need to find somebody within your state. But, with COVID, we've all also learned to be pretty adept at telehealth. And so if you can find somebody within your state, you can get the support that you need.
And would you advise anybody who is maybe thinking, "Oh, I'm making too much of this," to not to not do that, not ignore it?
Yeah, don't ignore it. Yeah, and I think that's like just a fair mental health statement to overall. But I think in the realm of the climate change, it could be easy to have somebody say like, that's not really a thing that you get therapy for. And as a therapist, I'm saying that is a thing. Like whatever is like stirring inside of you is a thing to bring to therapy. And we're here to be supportive of that.
We will put the Climate Psychology Alliance of North America's link on the Behavioral Corner website. Debbie, thanks so much. It's a big topic. We had just scratched the surface.
We have, yeah.
And we would love to have you back in the near future.
Anytime. I love this conversation. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much. You're going to read and hear a lot more about mental health and climate change going forward. We're glad we could bring you a little bit today. Don't forget Behavioral Corner, Apple Podcasts, wherever you get your podcasts. We love for you to like us. Follow us on Instagram and all those other places. See you next time on The Corner. Take care.
Retreat Behavioral Health has proudly been serving the community for over 10 years. Here at Retreat, we believe in the power of connection and quality care. We offer comprehensive, holistic, and compassionate treatment from industry-leading experts. Call 855-802-6600 or visit us at www.retreatbehavioralhealth.com to begin your journey today.
That's it for now. And make us a habit, hanging out at the Behavioral Corner. And when we're not hanging, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on the Behavioral Corner.